Welcome everybody back to Lit Sports Online. This is the UFC on ESPN 6 Reyes versus Weidman preview episode. Pat here again to talk about this mixed martial arts action. And this is on a Friday, is it not?
Yeah. October 18th, I think. On ESPN 2. So it's actually on cable, which is nice. Free card.
Yeah, free card. Let's get into the action.
All right.
So we got Joe Lauzon going up against Jonathan Pearce. Should be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about Joe Lauzon because he's awesome. Dude's just like gritty as hell. He just likes to get in brawls. He has a great submission game. This dude has won $750,000 throughout the course of his career just in fight of the night bonuses. Like, fight of the night is like generally given, the most exciting action-packed fight of that card. Each fighter gets like a $50,000 bonus. He has 16 of those things and has won almost $1 million in just those bonuses. And that's like not including his fight purse, which is way more than that, I think, at this point. But that's just crazy. I mean, the dude's been in the UFC for over 10 years. And it's just, I'm glad to see him fighting in his hometown this late in his career, and I would not bet against him.
Yeah, 10 years in the UFC, man. I mean, how do you avoid brain damage?
You don't. You don't avoid brain damage. Funny thing, though, is they probably still have less brain damage than a dude who's in the NFL for 5 years.
Speaking of which, Greg Hardy on the card.
Yeah.
Greg Hardy fighting UFC newcomer Ben Sassali. And, well, we all kind of knew the story with Greg Hardy, so I don't know if we really need to go there. But, I mean, what do you really see in this fight?
As with every Greg Hardy fight, I'm just hoping the other dude beats him up. I mean, Greg Hardy's gotten as far as he has, I think, without losing so far by just being a good athlete. He's just a big dude with a lot of power. He's quick and he's a great athlete for the heavyweight division, but who knows? Worth noting. People like to tune in to see him lose, so it's always kind of...
I mean, have they really put him up against anyone that's all that great yet?
No, he doesn't have that many fights. The only reason he's in the UFC as early as he is in his career is that he has the name value of being Greg Hardy, And, no, I think once he gets towards the top of the division, he's going to start... Eventually, athleticism only gets you so far until you meet the guys that are so much better than you at everything that it nullifies the fact that you're just a better natural athlete and have power. You know what I mean? He's not beating your Stipe Miocic or Francis Ngannou or Daniel Cormier or, any of those guys. But even like a Derek Lewis, I would love to see him versus Derek Lewis. Or I hear Anthony Johnson is going to come back as a heavyweight instead of a light heavyweight. I would love to see Anthony Johnson get a crack at Greg Hardy because Johnson's a monster. But who knows?
But are you surprised by, like, the number of guys that come out of something totally different? Like, well, I mean, I was going to bring up Brock Lesnar, but then again, he does have the wrestling background. Mm-hmm. But he also has the fake wrestling background that he came out of. So, like...
Yeah, but he did have a legitimate college wrestling career. And that's where a lot of the best fighters in the world come from, is high-level college wrestling. Chris Weidman, for example, who we're going to talk about later. John Jones, Daniel every high-level wrestler in the UFC came from being in a high-level college wrestling program. Or like your John Jones wasn't, a Division I wrestler, but he was a JUCO champ, and so was Curtis Blades, and Daniel Cormier was in the Olympics for wrestling, So Brock Lesnar, being a great college wrestler, could have, had there been money in the UFC back then, may have transitioned into MMA instead of pro wrestling, but why not go make millions of dollars as a pro wrestler instead of making a couple $100,000 to get in a real fight?
I mean, I guess eventually you want to switch over because you got bored of the fake fights.
Yeah, and Brock Lesnar is the freak of all freaks, And that's why he was just so good at MMA. He was so much bigger than everybody at the time. Like Brock Lesnar coming into MMA caused a weird reaction in the heavyweight division because everybody got as big as they possibly could, and that's where you saw those years of Frank Mir being an inflated monster, and you had your Shane Carwin and LeVar Johnson, just these giant dudes that hit hard as hell, but weren't like that great of fighters. Was just a reaction to Brock Lesnar just coming over and manhandling people. So everybody was like, I need to be able to compete with his strength. And they all just kind of blew up. But, then you see Cain Velasquez beat up Brock Lesnar. This little dude that, he's not ripped, he's not jacked. He's like a 240-pound dude that eats whatever the hell he wants. And it's just so good at wrestling that he demolished Brock Lesnar. It's pretty nuts.
But you talk about the name recognition of a Greg Hardy. Do we get the impression here that Greg Hardy actually has legitimate fans, or is it really just a case of people tuning in because they're like, oh, I want to see that guy get his ass beat?
I think that's how it starts for sure. He's a heel immediately without even saying anything. Is a heel just because people know, oh, that's that dude that no NFL team would touch because he beats up on women. And then the UFC is like, well, people, he came up through the amateur ranks and he's a good fighter. He's good enough that he would make it here of his own merits without being whatever. But I don't know. I think it is kind of a marketing ploy of like, we know that a certain amount of people will tune in just to see him get beat up. And now maybe he has fans because he's interesting to watch fight, but I don't know.
Before we move off of this fight, is there anything that we should know about Ben Sasalali, or is he kind of like an unknown guy?
He's like super unknown. He like doesn't even, I don't even think he has a Wikipedia page. I think he's like only got like a Sherdog profile or something like that.
So is this like his debut?
Yeah. I mean, they're throwing him to, they're not giving him an easy debut. That's for sure. So I would assume there's some level of hype around him.
Seems like it might be an attempt to further build up a Greg Hardy, but you can always hope for the upset.
I would hope so.
So the next fight, Yair Rodriguez versus Jeremy Stephens. This is going to be a bit of a grudge match, huh?
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we covered this in one of our recap videos. 15 seconds into their originally scheduled fight in Mexico City, where they were the main event, which is a big deal for Yair Rodriguez because he's from Mexico. So Mexican fighter headlining a Mexican card. Big deal, right? Huge crowd, 50,000 people or something crazy. 15 seconds into the fight, Rodriguez poked Jeremy Stephens in the eye. Jeremy Stephens is not able to continue. And then Rodriguez, after the fight, goes on to kind of talk shit. Like, well, he has to live with that decision for the rest of his life. He didn't want to continue the fight, blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, you poked him in the eye. Like, we've all been poked in the eye. That hurts. And a doctor said, Jeremy Stephens, can you see straight? And he said no, and the doctor said, you can't fight then. I mean, that's fair, right?
Why do I feel like we've been seeing this happen like more and more recently? There was another fight recently and something like this happened.
Yeah.
The eye poke.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. It's kind of a hazard of the sport and the equipment, right? Like those gloves don't force you to curl your hands at all. They're designed basically to stop your knuckles from cutting the other guy and to allow you to still grapple. So there's a lot of finger mobility. Like where boxing, it doesn't happen because your fingers aren't out. But in Pride, they used to have gloves that forced your hands to be curled like this. So there was far less eye pokes because you can't really flatten your hand out.
Was there far less grappling as a result?
Not really. No. I mean, I think there were less grappling at that time just because there were less people who came up through grappling backgrounds. Like wrestling wasn't as prevalent in MMA at the time and all that stuff because it was over in Japan, and so there wasn't a base of American wrestlers coming up through Pride. But I think it was just maybe a better design of the gloves. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, we do see it from time to time, and it sucks. It ends a high profile fight, right, and then causes a whole turmoil, and Rodriguez starts talking shit, and then he tracked down Jeremy Stephens in the lobby of the hotel, and basically manufactured a situation to try to make Jeremy Stephens look bad. He approached Jeremy Stephens while his team sat 20 feet away recording him on a cell phone. Like, all right, man.
Yeah. So, like, it seems like in recent years there's been, like, an uptick in, like, the showmanship and the shit-talking on UFC. Is that fair to say?
I think so. It is a direct reaction to Conor McGregor, I believe. Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor. It was like all of a sudden there were these over-the-top personalities. And people tuned in not only because of that, because both of those fighters are phenomenal fighters. And Conor McGregor, you know, Conor McGregor's rise through the UFC was kind of like meteoric, you know. He came in and just started knocking out people and calling his shots, and then he knocked out one of the greatest fighters in the lighter weight class history in like 13 seconds. So if that hadn't happened, his personality wouldn't have gotten him as far as it did. But you see this shit talk, this over-the-top craziness, it's the Money Mayweather approach, essentially. And everybody's kind of doing that to an extent now. Everybody realizes conflict, like true conflict, will sell a fight more than guys just being like, yeah, he's a great fighter, I really respect him, I train hard, I know he trains hard, I just try to train harder than him, and, you know, the better man will win, or whatever. Like, that doesn't sell a like, as much as, like, that's, like, cool, that's, like, super respectful, like, that's what you would hope for, right? But when dudes are talking shit, that's what makes people want to watch a fight.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
everybody's trying to do that now, and this wasn't like a manufactured situation. You know, it's a real eye poke and all this stuff, and like, you know, all the fans in Mexico City flipped out and throwing beer cans at people. But I don't know. It's still an interesting fight either way. It's completely different striking styles. Both guys are real good strikers, but Rodriguez has a longer distance striking game, a lot more kicks. And Stephens is kind of more of a brawler, but he has a real power in all of his shots. He ends fights by flying knee, with punches, by anything. And the prospect of Jeremy Stephens being angry at you is pretty terrifying if you have to stand in front of him this fight. I mean, he has some brutal knockouts. Dude used to fight at 170, three weight classes up from where he is now. And I think it's gonna be a fun fight. I think Rodriguez is a little better at distance, heavy kicks, maybe a little better at managing the distance of the fight, and is a little quicker. But if Stephens is able to get past that range and get on the inside and land at some big shots, then he has, you know, fight changing power in both of his hands.
So we'll have to see if the shit talker can back up his shit talking.
I guess so.
And then the main event, Dominic Reyes versus Chris Weidman.
Yeah.
So, the former middleweight champ going up against a light heavyweight for the first time.
Yeah, it's interesting to see this kind of trend happening in the UFC where guys are jumping up a weight class to see if they feel better than they did when they had to cut weight. And in a lot of cases, we've seen it be successful, especially with the lighter weight classes where there's less of a size difference between the weight classes. You know, it's every 10 pounds. It's 125, 135, 45, 55, and then you go to 70. So there's still that 50 to 70, 55 to 70. Still see some success there. Still see some success from welterweight up to middleweight, 70 to 85. But the past few times we've seen the middleweight to light heavyweight jump hasn't gone so well. Namely, in the guy that took the title from Chris Weidman at middleweight, Luke Rockhold. Rockhold went up a weight class. Everybody thought, wow, he's a giant middleweight anyway. Kind of saw it coming that he was going to jump a weight class, and then he got knocked out. Broke his jaw. Out for an extended period of time. So once you get to the point where it's, you know, the difference between 185 and 205, like that's a 20-pound difference is pretty big when you have guys that cut weight. You know, Chris Weidman probably was cutting weight from 205 or 210 to get to 185. So now he's going to be fighting a dude that walks around at 235, 240 in the, you know, when he's not eating right to keep on weight for a fight. That's a big difference in the size of the guy. So that could be a big advantage for the guy who's naturally a light heavyweight. That being said, Weidman's a fantastic fighter. He's a former, like I said, the former middleweight champ, and he has beat guys that have had success at light heavyweight. He beat Lyoto Machida, who's a former light heavyweight champ. So Weidman's not going to be totally undersized, But I think the strength of a guy who's naturally a little bit bigger. Reyes might have a little bit longer of a reach. I don't know. He's also more of a striker than Weidman. So it's an interesting matchup. And I'm interested to see how Weidman looks at that weight class. Some guys go up and they feel better, so they move better. They're better cardio. Some guys go up and they're just not used to carrying that little bit of extra weight, and they end up being slower.
So, I mean, the thing is, like we said earlier, this is a free card. So the main event on a non-pay-per-view type of deal, does this main event really mean much for either of these guys?
Yeah, it does. I mean, especially having a former champ in the fight is a big deal. And Weidman is still a big name. People still recognize the name Chris Weidman. He's the guy who beat Anderson Silva for the first time in forever. He ended Anderson Silva's reign of dominance over the middleweight division. And so he's one of those guys who, if he switches weight classes, he's immediately in the title talk. He was never outside of title contention after he won the title, really. He had a couple losses in a row, but one fight, he beat, he loses to to Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold, then he beats Kelvin Gastelum, and everybody's saying he should get a title shot. But it's he won one of his last 4 fights, and he's still in talks for a title shot. So going up a weight class, he's immediately okay, what would Chris Weidman versus John Jones look like? So both of these guys, especially Dominic Reyes, having won his last fight against Volkan Oezdemir, former title challenger, Dominic Reyes is on his way up. Chris Weidman's a big name. So either guy winning this fight, I think, puts them into a #1 contenders fight or a title shot, because light heavyweight's kind of a thin division as it is. John Jones has just ruined the light heavyweight division almost by being so dominant, him and Cormier.
Yeah, well, I guess you got to bring up some other guys that can actually push him for a challenge.
Yeah, and Weidman's one of those guys. His skill set is unique. Nobody else in the light heavyweight division fights quite the way he does, has quite the grappling background that he does, at least at the top. So I would be interested to see, if he gets past Dominic Reyes, which is no easy feat. Dominic Reyes is a big dude with some heavy strikes and good takedown defense. So if Weidman isn't able to get the fight to the ground, he might be in some trouble. But I think he will, and I think he'll get a submission or a TKO. But either one of these guys going up towards the top of the division is fun to see how they're gonna fare, and throw him to John Jones and see what happens. John Jones looks a little different every fight these days, and he can't be at the top forever.
So that's going to do it for this episode. Make sure, again, to tune in on Friday to watch this full card. All the bouts that we discussed, they're all going to be there for free for you to watch on ESPN2, right?
Yep.
ESPN2. So, again, thanks for watching Lit Sports Online and LitTube. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and check out our description. We got our website in there. Stay tuned. Giggity giggity, giggity goo. Next time.
All right.